Hi, and welcome to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast, highlighting artists, teachers, authors, and philanthropreneurs of the regenerative movement. People who are committed to and showcase qualities of planetary leadership. My name is Julian Guderlei. I'm committed to a world that allows people from all walks of life to thrive. I'm your host and creator of Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast. And in today's episode, my guest is Daniela Fernandez, founder of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. Daniela is an award-winning social entrepreneur, thought leader, and internationally sought-after speaker on the entrepreneurial mindset, ocean innovation, technology, youth empowerment, and sustainability. She is a World Economic Forum global shaper and a member of Friends of Ocean Action, a select group of leaders working to fast-track solutions to ocean challenges. She was awarded the 2020 Rising Star Visionary Award by the Silicon Valley Forum and also named a 2019 Forbes 30 Under 30 social entrepreneur. So that's really amazing recognition for the important work she's doing. And today we'll talk about the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, investing in startup solutions, cultivating ideas, and developing leaders. So with these words, welcome, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Julian. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this conversation and also all the amazing followers that you have. And I'm just appreciative of everyone's understanding and passion for our environment sustainability.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're all really eager and keen to learn and understand how to solve some of the world's challenges, right? And so um, I'm not sure if I quite have the world solutions in a book, but I'm so curious to hear what people are actually doing and implementing and accelerating our creative learning.
Sure, no, and I think that, one of the interesting aspects of the ocean space is understanding that in the past, the ocean space was mainly used for travel, right, for transporting goods. It was used for exploitation, but it wasn't necessarily thought about a place that needed to be cared for. We didn't really understand the regenerative aspect of our ocean, like how can we truly make sure it's sustainable and how can we create industries around that space. So it's been a very new development in the past few years, really, in developing this ocean technology space and in understanding what solutions exist and what solutions are needed. Because we are in a place that it's ripe for disruption. Everything about our lives just needs to change in a way that is sustainable and it's in line with the values that we have for our planet. So I'm happy to go into specific solutions, but I guess I just wanted to start with framing how the ocean space has evolved over the past hundreds of years, and the way that we're looking at it is completely different.
Yeah, I think that's super exciting because sometimes it's hard to see from our current vantage point that the decisions that were made in the past, this is just how they're carrying out. But sometimes certain aspects weren't even part of the decision table, right? Like you said it, ocean, transportation, getting goods across. Now we're really thinking about biodiversity and who we are in the ecology of planet Earth. I don't think this has always been part of the human consciousness. And so now that we get to have this conversation, of course, there's a lot of work to do because it feels like we're out of resonance or out of balance with the oceans. Is that
Absolutely.
what is that what you're seeing and finding? Yeah.
I do, and I think that it is really our generation that has that mentality and that has shifted the way where where we put our time, our money, and our attention. Right. In the past generations have really valued the bottom line and wealth and personal development without necessarily caring who gets hurt, right? Who gets injured in the process. And I believe that our generation and younger generations have been born into climate change. Like we don't have to convince anyone anymore that climate change is real, that our planet needs our help. Rather, the conversation has shifted very quickly to we know this is the reality, but what can we do to mitigate it? What can we do to protect it? What can we do to improve the condition? So I agree with you. I think that now we're seeing a lot more money being deployed into sustainable travel, sustainable agriculture, sustainable businesses. We're seeing a lot of corporations no longer able to greenwash their ways out of things by simply putting up a logo or a certification and saying they're sustainable, because people are finally holding them accountable and asking the real questions like, how are you actually contributing to the environment in a positive way? And I also see a lot of people changing their actions, being more conscious about what they're eating, how they're eating, about their plastic consumption. And it's exciting and it's hopeful, but I do think that people need to understand that we need to act with urgency, right? There was this
More bold action, that's for sure.
yeah,
I'll say
absolutely.
yes to that. Yeah, yeah.
It's there was that clock at the in New York, in the New York building, that it tells us that we have 7 years left right before we're at a climate crisis. So that's, we can't come back from. And I wish that clock was just, pasted in all over the world, reminding people of that every single day counts.
Yeah, that's very true. This is the golden decade, and only if we make it so. And it's the decade of, ecological kind of regeneration. I think is the language that comes out of the sustainability movement, really. And I love the topic of the ocean because my show is called Green Planet, Blue Planet. So for me, like clean water, or the idea of water as in its most alive state, is something really fascinating. Tell us a little bit about the projects that you're doing that are ocean related, that we can picture, or maybe there's a good story to tell about some of those projects.
Sure. So maybe I'll start with one that is close to my heart, because I actually heard of them when I was just a student in college. So there's a company called Lollyware, and what Lollyware is, they're creating straws out of seaweed, to replace plastic creation, and their straws will last, in water for 18 hours, and then they're designed to disappear, right? So they can be turtle food, or they'll just disappear into water streams, or in the ocean, as opposed to harming our environment with pollutants. So what was an interesting story about them was that I remember seeing them on Shark Tank, when I was a
Wow.
college student, and back then they had a cup. They hadn't pivoted to straws quite yet, but I remember watching them on Shark Tank, and they weren't getting a lot of love or attention from the investors, and I just sat there feeling so frustrated at the sharks, saying to myself, if I had the money to invest in this company, if I could do something to help them get to the next level, get them into market, I would do that. And so I think that it's a great story, because now, fast forward, they joined our accelerator program in 2018, and now SOA has invested in
Wow.
them.
Really cool.
We have supported their growth. We have supported their ability to get to market, to get media attention, to get more visibility in this space. So it's a full circle for me in a way, right? And being able to have them be a reason why I became passionate about this space, and then for me to be actively supporting their growth and trajectory.
It's a really great story how it was a part of your life already before, and now they're kind of full circle integrated into what you're creating and accelerating. The idea of seaweed that then turns literally into turtle food, I think, is the dinner story that I'd love the whole world to talk about. You know what I mean? Like, look, like, what if we created products and built out of materials that are in a synergy with life at all times, in harmony with life, and how if that was the next revolution, like a renaissance that humanity goes through, and we to redevelop our industries into a way that, I mean, beyond seaweed maybe, but matter of fact, algae is actually very, very, very versatile. But yeah, the original way to do carbon drawdown at the same kind of token, right? Because you're suddenly you know changing the traces of pollution that this entire planet has left. So that's an ingenious idea. How many participants are in those cohorts of accelerators?
So back in 2018, we had 5 companies, and they ranged everywhere. I gave you the plastic example, or the plastic-free example with this company. Another company, interesting to highlight, they're called CalWave Technologies. And what they're doing is they're leveraging the power, the motion of ocean waves to produce sustainable, fossil-free electricity and power. And so that is an industry itself that takes a very long time to do R&D. It's very capital intensive, and also need to find the right pilot partners. And so we've been working with them to get them set up to different, for example, island nation. Like, imagine that if their technology can power an entire island nation and take them off the grid. I mean, to me, that's success. And to me, that's something that it's so necessary and at the core of what we need in these industries, right? Because it's not just about a straw, or it's not just about a material we use day to day, but it's about how we need to live and function as a society. We need electricity, right? So just to give you a sense of the range of
Absolutely,
companies.
yeah.
And then
Full spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had in last year we had 15 companies join our accelerator, and this year we just announced 9 companies that will be joining our program for the 2020 cohort.
That's amazing. I live on an island, so I can totally see how, the challenge that some places in the world will be like pioneers, eco pioneers of solving some of our current issues in the way we treat nature into a synergistic way that makes the whole region thrive, right? Because like literally, if you're able to get off the grid in such a massive way that an entire island nation was run by the ocean's current, yeah, it's a complete different reality on that island because suddenly like there is this abundance of resource present. Very, very exciting. So maybe you can tell us also a bit about the controversies that might be around, just like continuously trying to find economic solutions to our climate. Like I'd be super curious to hear from you about that because I think economic solutions are so important and so vital, but there is a social and cultural change that goes hand in hand with this renaissance we just called it a little earlier.
Sure. No, and I think that there's not one silver bullet that will help us solve all the problems in our environment and in ocean. And the way I like to think about it is like a triad, right? Like we absolutely need policy to be in place to be able to support the development of these economic solutions, right? We need subsidies, we need governments to be entrepreneurship friendly, right? We're
Totally.
personally working with governments globally to help them understand what is the ocean technology sector in the space and how can they support these entrepreneurs, how can they support research and development, how can they make it more accessible for people to think about the ocean in different ways. So I do think that policy has a really important role to play. The second one would be consumer adoption, right? And like you mentioned, like habit changes. If we create seaweed straws and people aren't going to buy them, then that's not going to work, right? Just supply and demand, the economics 101, we need to make sure that people change their mindsets, their mentalities, and their adoption preferences to these opportunities and to these alternatives, right, that we're building for them. So I do think that from the consumer and the cultural standpoint is very critical. And then, of course, the third one is the economic solutions, right? If you don't create these new technologies, these new innovations, we're not going to have an alternative no matter what law is passed, right? If we say fossil fuels are
Mhm.
banned, we need to have something to replace that with, right? We need to have an alternative because people aren't going to just stop living their day-to-day lives, right? We need to make sure we provide some type of technology development and creation to replace what already exists. So
Absolutely, we need steps forward and suggestions, and these, like islands, like these incubators that are pioneers in what they're bringing. It's so interesting to me because it's not just that we could ban the use of oil because we're not quite there yet. We're currently still at subsidizing it, which is like that impetus and that unfair advantage that oil actually has across many industries needs to be removed first and foremost, I believe, so that there is literally no more subsidy into that marketplace. So it's being recognized as a dying industry that will be replaced eventually by a myriad of solutions.
exactly. No, and that's right. And I do think that that's why it's important for us to have policy. We need to have, economic solutions and also cultural change to make anything happen.
Yeah, powerful. I like that a lot. So let me ask you, like personally, in that triad, right? So how do you find optimism for this mission again and again, and every day you're like, you know what? It actually is happening. Like I'm driving a piece of change that is very vital and important.
Personally, I get that energy and that hope because at SOA we have a community of entrepreneurs that I see what they're working on. I see the developments. I see the progress they're making. I see the excitement in their eyes and hearing and talking about their updates that things are progressing, right? So from that perspective, that gives me a lot of hope. And I also have a community of young people in over 165 countries that are working on the ground on different ocean projects, right? And these are more on the cultural side of change. They are working in the backyard, in their own backyards, solving these local issues and hearing from them and seeing, just to give you an example, one of our hubs in Liberia, what they're doing is they're working on and changing the entire infrastructure of their recycling system, right? And they're taking it upon themselves to do it, to teach little kids how to recycle, to teach their village how to recycle, which is something that needs to happen from the ground up, right? I'm not a
Absolutely. Yeah.
believer that it's just top down decisions that are going to change the world. It has to be a little bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you took it there. You know, the cultural change has a lot to do with how we include and invite the younger generations, because there's a lot of energy and a lot of maybe even idealism, but just like a very good kind of drive in all of us when we're young, and just have this desire to make the world a good place, right?
Exactly, exactly. And like we talked about earlier, it's no longer about having to educate or convince them about the changes that need to happen. We now need to flip that mentality and think about empowering them and enabling them and giving them a voice and a platform, which is what SOA does. We're no longer just sending them information about how bad things are in the ocean, because they know. We are now shifting that by giving them resources, tools, education, mentorship they need to take their own ideas and bring them to life.
Talk about mindset. It's literally changing that fast that the next generation doesn't need any statistic or convincing. It's more about, okay, we're actually ready for inspired action now. It's changing through the generations. Like, I love that you earlier touched on frustration a bit, because that's what got me to start this podcast, is the frustration of how few stories are actually out there about amazing research, amazing teams of local initiatives. And the more I've been looking into this work over the last years, it's the planet is full of really powerful communities that are driving change that is going to have social, environmental, and ecological impacts in the most beautiful imaginable way. So I'm very grateful the more I get to see the work that's done in the world, to really see we're just starting to seed for the future harvest, I believe, because this is an entire decade of change, and we shouldn't underestimate what we're capable to do in a decade. That quote usually goes backward, that we overestimate how much we can achieve in 1 year, but in a decade, as a collective, as a big group of interconnected people weaving together in story and in support, I think there's a lot possible.
Definitely. And I agree with that. I also think that, there's a lot of room for growth and improvement in convincing, older adults, I guess, that little kids are taking upon themselves to change their parents' habits, to change their parents' way of thinking. So you see that dynamic, clashing, but also you see the opportunity to not only focus on young people, but focus on adults and changing their ways of thinking about this.
Totally. Let me ask you about purpose, because that to me feels really purposeful. And so I always love to understand, I talk about planetary purpose and have a few programs around that as well, because I love this idea of more people being in support of themselves and the planet. What have you found was helpful for you to be so magnetized to your purpose, to your mission, to your drive?
For me, I grew up in Ecuador. I grew up in a beautiful country that was always surrounded by nature. I was, surrounded by the Amazon rainforest and the beautiful pristine beaches of Ecuador and mountains, every time around me. So my childhood was pretty much like in nature paradise. And so I think that early on, I understood and I valued the importance of our natural ecosystems and environments. And then I found out by watching Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, that those environments were at risk, right? And that the animals, right? Penguins are my favorite animal, that their lives were at risk, their existence were at risk. So I always go back to when I'm stressed or frustrated, or I'm having a tough day, because being an entrepreneur, it's not easy. I always go back to the reason why I'm doing this, right? And I'm doing this not because I wanted to become a social entrepreneur. I didn't even know that entrepreneurship existed. But I'm doing this because I want to make a difference in the world, in their natural habitat of other animals, of people. I want to give back. I want to, support something that's bigger than myself. So what grants me always is watching documentaries, right? And just being educated and seeing and feeling and learning about our natural environments, and seeing what's going on with them, and just being being woke, right, to the reality of the situation. And I feel like many people don't watch documentaries, or don't read, or are afraid, or they're, too stressed to handle it all. But I think it's important to just remind yourself of why our environment is so important to all of us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How do you, in these times we're in, how do you draw the line of trust? Like, how does trust happen for you, and how do you trust information, or how do you go about it in this like very, some people might call it confusing, the way the media is set up.
I do believe that there is so much noise and so much misinformation out there that I just look at the source of everything, right? I look at the hard research. I look at the scientists that have come up with this research, right? So it's tough because as a consumer, you can't only read a headline anymore from a specific source and believe it. You have to dig. You have to do your own homework, and see where that's coming from, right? Even in speeches that I give, I'm not just regurgitating facts that I've heard or are being used widely without really understanding where did these facts come from, and then you see people pick them up, and then you have to figure out like what was the origin of that fact, right? And have there been peer studies around the fact, especially when it comes to science, right? And science such a uh, black and white type of fact finding mission that you have to do, but I do think it's important that people take some time and do their homework before just sharing something or believing something that isn't real.
Yeah, absolutely. It's being media literate is an interesting chapter of maturing as a human, and I kind of wish we taught that to children. In fact, one of the global shapers projects I did a few years ago was to create a curriculum for media literacy for schools. Just to remember that we did this like a few times. Very interesting, because at times you're like talking about mediums of communication that the children, even though I was in my 20s, would have different channels of communication that you don't even know about, that aren't the regular Facebooks or Instagrams or Snapchats. But anyway, so being media literate takes a lot. I appreciate your opinion there. And now I want to know from you about schools and education. Like, if you could reinvent, Daniela, the education system at large, right, with a team of experts or by yourself, like what would you change? What are the first things that come to mind?
So one thing I would absolutely make sure we have is just basic ocean literacy education. To give you an example, when you think about where oxygen comes from, 99% of people will tell you it comes from trees. And the reality is that 50%, or every second breath you take, actually comes from the ocean, right? So no matter where you live, even if you don't live near the ocean or in a coastal area, if you're landlocked, the ocean is still supplying 50% of your oxygen levels, right? So it still is a humongous part of your day-to-day survival that most people don't know. Another fact is that the ocean feeds 3.2 billion people in the world. And if we're out of fish, that means we're going to have mass starvation happening. So I share these two facts because there are some of the most basic facts that I believe everyone should know, just as we all know that trees supply oxygen that a lot of the majority of educational systems don't provide. So that would be one thing. And then the second thing I would do is provide curriculum around conscious leadership and being an entrepreneur, and just being more soft skills focused that you don't learn in school, right? You don't learn how to raise funding, or how to do public speaking, or how to build a campaign. And I think that the fact that you have to go out of your way, even outside of a university or school, to learn those skills prevents a lot of people from getting them early on, and doesn't allow them to build that self-esteem or that confidence they need to be leaders in their own right. So those are the two things I would do.
Yeah, that's a fantastic place to start. um, Leadership development in general, I think, is something ongoingly that it also changes, like what is required from a leader in the 21st century. you know um, Hopefully, I'm going to just be super optimistic in my language here, post an equality revolution, right, where we're truly equal as human beings with each other, is very different than what was required from a leader, let's say even 50 years ago, right? So how do you maybe personally continuously develop your leadership skills? Like, is there any specific program you remember that was awesome, or some kind of modality or game that you've played where you're like, wow, I got to share this? But do you go to these kind of, through these cycles of deeper practice, deeper devotion, personal development skills?
I absolutely do, and mainly it's a very situational base, right? Especially being the CEO and a manager in an organization. I have a team now, and it's something that, again, you're never taught how to be a CEO. You're never taught how to manage people, how to deal with conflict in the workspace, especially when you're the one that has to make the hard decisions. So I found that a lot of my personal leadership training has come from situations where I needed to figure out, what do I do, right? And not even what do I do in a practical sense, but how will my values align with my actions? And I think that's the core that everyone needs to figure out. It's know yourself, practice self-awareness, understand what values you want to live by. And it may not be the easiest decision to make, but it's something that you have to live with if you're going to live by your values, right? So I've done a lot of personal development through self-learning, self-education, reading, finding books, doing some research, doing some meditations and reflections. I haven't necessarily taken any courses per se, but I have gone into cycles of, for example, if I'm trying to practice to be more patient, right, and be more open to ideas from my team, I look into research or books that will make me a better leader in that capacity, right? Or if I'm looking, to be more stoic, right? I've recently been reading a lot of stoicism and the philosophy, and reading, from the great philosophers about how do you practice control, how do you practice, living in the moment. So, it definitely ranges over time, and very situational. But I would recommend that people start on that journey early on. And one thing I say to entrepreneurs and founders is they come to me asking, like, what is the first thing I need to do before starting a company? And then they're expecting for me to say the traditional, put a business plan together, put a fundraising plan together. And they're shocked when I say to them, work on your self-development and tell me what your values are and how are you going to reflect those values in your company. And people don't think about that early on. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'm in absolute agreement with you that that's front and center. I think values and following through with them is like number one intercultural skill that humanity has to develop as nations or as neighbors, right? And through governance one day as well. So like absolutely, that's a core skill to become an entrepreneur these days, or a philanthropreneur, or a regenerative leader, or pioneer. Daniela, that's great. I have two more questions for you. And first, I would love to hear, having traveled, being from Ecuador, um, having so many different ocean projects that you're aware of, what are maybe two or even three favorite places on planet Earth that you have?
Wow. So the first one, I am biased because I'm from Ecuador, but I have to say the Galapagos. It would be number one. Um, and the reason why, it's because when you go to the Galapagos, you travel to a prehistoric era where humans aren't the main inhabitants, right? You feel like you're actually a visitor of you're visiting another species world, and to me that's so rare because we have taken over so much of our planet Earth that it's hard to find those pristine areas where animals actually rule and not people. So that would be my number one. Number two, I would say Bali in Indonesia, and that one I choose because there's so much beauty in Bali. There's so much beauty in their beaches, they're in their small islands that I think everyone should experience. And there's also a lot of this destruction. There's a lot of garbage. Um, there's a lot of pollution going on. So I think it's important for people to see what has happened, the change that has occurred from having this amazing, place that everyone loved to visit and experience a clear, pristine waters and the biodiversity and marine life, and then seeing now how it is. And it's truly heartbreaking, but I think it's important for people to see that change. And then the last place I'll mention is Belize. I've also had a chance to do some scuba diving and snorkeling in Belize. And one of my experiences was I was swimming in Belize, and I was, near some coral reefs and near some like very drop like a canyon drop off point, and I was swimming with a school of fish, and it felt as if they had adopted me. It felt as if they had made me part of their species, and they were taking me around, giving me a tour of their coral reefs area. So that was an unreal experience to just see so much wildlife, so many marine animals, and I swam with sharks, with manta rays, with these beautiful fish that I think everyone needs to sometimes experience to value the ocean a little bit more.
What wonderful places, and of course they're all connected to the ocean. Yeah, thank you for that little tour. I always enjoy hearing the gratitude and the excitement that people have for places around planet Earth, really, our blue planet, our home planet. And so the last question I have is a little bit more on the visionary spectrum. And my pursuit since the beginning of this podcast was to track and kind of keep an awareness about people's visions for this planet and see what's in people's minds and hearts when it comes to what are we even doing on this planet? Why are we here? What are we doing here as an entire species? And so if you were to zoom out with me into 7 generations going forward, what's your dream for our home planet, for planet Earth, taking into account that we're the ancestors of the future?
I would say that for me, the vision I have now is to restore the health of our ocean in our lifetime, right? And that, even saying that, it's a pretty ambitious vision to have, but I think we don't have an alternative. If we can't restore the health of our ocean in our lifetime, future generations will be doomed. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a very doom and gloom, but it's a reality, right? We're at a tipping point where we need to do something now. And I guess the other aspect of this is also living in harmony with our environment, right? Like it comes as simple as that. Let's build new businesses, new enterprises. Let's build things that will be in harmony for their planet, so that we don't have to harm it. And I think if everyone was in line with that vision, everyone practiced, change their habits, change the way they bank, change the way that they travel in line with those two values, I think our world would be a better place very, very soon.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Coming into harmony with the planet, with the ecosystem, with our carbon cycle, with the ocean's balance, with everything that really makes nature go round and round, or us go around the sun, right? And the sun around the black hole. So thank you so much for that vision. I really appreciate it, and I really love that you took the time, Daniela. If there's any project or initiative you would love to point your finger at, or say a few words that people can find to either be in touch with you or be in touch with the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're always looking for entrepreneurs to be part of our future accelerator programs. We're also always looking for just like people that want to be part of this ocean ecosystem. We take mentors. We also take a young leader. So if you're a young person that wants to start an ocean project, definitely get a hold of us. You can find us at Instagram at SO Alliance, or just soalliance.org. And you can personally find me. I'm always answering people's DM questions on Instagram at DV Fernandez. So that would be the best way to reach us.
Awesome. I'll make sure to link that out as well in the show notes and make it trackable for people. Thank you so much, Daniela. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, Julian. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. Bye.